Come on. Hello and welcome to the War Report. We are back with another packed news. Would have expected this week, but here we are. We have, of course, we're going to foreign policy, State of the Union. We're going to some stuff about the withdrawal has been made official as of Friday. Bolton, Ukraine, so that's going to be some fun. Maybe some of our predictions have come to fruition. Hungary is in a spat with the EU again, so that's fun. Macedonia has fallen to NATO, so that's a bit unfortunate. More Venezuelan news. Some good news about Korea. There's going to be another Korean summit. Afghanistan negotiations. Some of Trump's comments on Israel. Lebanon. Saudi Arabia, no surprise, supports terrorism. And we'll get into a few other stories here. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, in my opinion, the State of the Union overall on both domestic foreign policy issues was disappointing. It was lackluster. Trump did make some interesting comments on his foreign policy, though. He reflected the schizophrenic foreign policy, as you put it, a while back. He talked about how we have to stop the endless wars and stop the nation building, but then he berates Iran and Venezuela, saying we need to keep them in check. He also talked about withdrawing from Syria, but we need to protect Israel, which we'll get back to later in the show. His only point that wasn't followed up by, I guess you call it contradiction, was the fact that we're going to have a second Korean summit. Now, the audience, which was Congress in this case, of course, was really no better. They were almost silent when Trump called out the endless wars, but had thunderous applause when he announced his decision on the INF in his statements on Iran and Venezuela. They thought that was the best thing ever. Now, maybe I'm reaching here, but when he said Congress was obstructing his policies with investigations, he said something about we can't do this if I'm under constant obstruction and you're trying to push me in the wars. It seemed like a call for help, like stop the investigations. Our relations with Russia are so terrible because Congress is convinced I'm a Russian puppet. So maybe there was a bit of call for help there. Maybe I'm reaching though.
I don't know if you're reaching. I think everybody knows he's beleaguered. I mean, at this point, I don't even know if Trump is playing that or not. It's just very hard to gauge him right now. But the fact remains, he is beleaguered. There's no question. I mean, the amount of things he's been able to say and do so far is still kind of extraordinary for a president. When he's gone, I think the system will be very happy to pretend he was never here. After a short period of, openly stating everything that has been fixed that he quote unquote ruined. But yeah, I noticed that in the address as well. Basically, the Democrats and the Republicans basically cheered every single neocon point. Which we're in an empire, folks. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's no surprise there. But again, I won't get too much into it. But some of his domestic policy things were good. But overall, it was like, oh, I think genocide, childhood cancer, and AIDS are bad. Please applaud me. That's what you could boil it down to.
Yeah. I mean, I will forever be grateful for what he said about the latest abortion issue, the post-birth abortion. He was right on that. For me, that was the one good thing that he said the entire speech. Everything else was, a speech that had nothing in common with Trump campaigning in 2016. It didn't even have that much in common with his first address in 2017.
Yeah. I mean, something was Stephen Miller, as much as I may not like his Zionistic leanings, has been pretty sympathetic to, I guess you could call it, our movement. I don't even think he had a place in writing this, and Stephen Miller's been pretty big in writing a lot of Trump speeches, especially some of the better ones. But let's move on to some of the more topics in the show. So on Friday, February 2nd, the U.S. officially withdrew from the INF Treaty. Now, as we said, the treaty will not be invalidated for the next 6 months. So in August is when the treaty will finally go out the window. There is a glimmer of hope, however. Trump said in the State of the Union that he wanted to make a new treaty with Russia and hopefully include China in this new treaty. Now, as I said before, I have no problem with this in theory, but Trump will be hindered by the snakes he's surrounded himself with. You think, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. Now, while Trump may want to sign a new treaty, Bolton and Pompeo will want to go with the Cold War route and want to make Russia collapse in on stuff like we did the Soviet Union in the 80s, not even 30 years ago. And I doubt that the Russians have that short of a memory.
Russia has said that they will not be pulled into an arms race, but I think the pullout from the INF, and I'm really disappointed in myself, to be honest. In my opinion, right now, after having looked at this, this issue and this topic, America is pulling out of the INF treaty not because it considers Russia a threat, but because it considers China a threat. Because the INF only applies to the limitation of intermediate missiles, not ICBMs, to America and Russia. Right? America hasn't really developed any new missiles since the 80s. There was one in the 90s that did. And there's no such limitation like that on China, which doesn't surprise me. I was thinking this actually before the speech, about a week before. So when he mentioned China to be part of a trilateral agreement on intermediate nuclear missiles, I'm not surprised.
No, absolutely not. And I do think that this show jumped the gun. But granted, I've always had that in the back of my mind. But at the end of the day, I agree with that. But I also have fears that, of course, the snakes will try to derail this. And you know what? It may be actually a backdoor agreement between the U.S. and Russia. This could be just some theatrics with them, exchanging words and Putin saying, "Oh, I'm not going to get involved in new arms race," and Trump saying, "Oh, you violated the treaty, so we have to pull out." But I could see Trump using the rationale as Russia is bad to win over the hawks in Washington, because he almost did that with actually the surveillance issue on China. He did this sometime back in the summer, so it's not uncommon. He'll use Russia as a bludgeon to attack China. It's a bit odd in a way, but if it works, it works. And I'm not necessarily too pessimistic about this. I'm not even too much annoyed about this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to be able to turn China against Russia. That's not going to happen. He doesn't have enough leverage. America itself doesn't have enough leverage to pull something like that off. You can't keep expanding NATO and give Russia a nice deal. And Russia won't be satisfied merely with, less American presence and support for Ukraine, because I just don't think Russia, I don't think they're even in a position to trust America, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we would need a withdrawal to pre-1990 positions, like we get out of Eastern Europe. Look, we might keep some in Western Europe. I think that could be negotiable. Not that I'm saying that we need to. I think barring a few exceptions, I think most of our troop presence in Western Europe is unnecessary. But I think, yeah, we're not going to get any progress with Russia while we still have troops in Eastern Europe and adding Eastern European countries to NATO. But I will say this. Despite Putin's comments, now he said he won't be sucked into another arms race, but then he made some comments saying we also won't back down. I doubt he's going to fall for the trap that some people are trying to push him into, which is sinking money into a massive arms race, especially considering the fact, again, it's within living memory. He was actually working for the government, for the KGB, granted, during the 80s, during the time when Reagan did the same thing to the Soviet Union. So I doubt he's that dumb. And in fact, I think quite the opposite. So he's not going to get sucked into this. Trump has also expressed that, yeah, I don't want a new arms race. He's expressed that several other times. But again, it's more so the people Trump is surrounded with and the DC establishment that I fear is going to try to derail this. I'm not too black-pilled, not too frustrated about this, but yeah, I have my apprehensions, as I think anyone does.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Russia is going to use China against America. Russia will use China in order to make America spend money on new missile technology in Asia.
Yeah, and as we said, Russia.
This is part of the Pacific. This is part of the Pacific pivot. I mean,
yeah.
I wasn't thinking about this. I just thought, send more carriers, build more bases, and so on. But eventually, they will have to install intermediate missiles, short range, offering almost no reaction time, so on and so forth. So, if anything, really. I think Russia will ignore it. It knows that America needs these missiles in the Pacific. Of course, America will place some in Eastern Europe, but its main concern is China. So,
yeah, and as we were discussing in previous weeks, Russia has kind of walked itself into the win-win situation where if the Chinese skyrocket, they're going to go with the Chinese. They've made inroads in Europe, especially with the populists and the neoliberals, the European Union types, which we'll talk a little bit about the Nord 2 pipeline. But again, so Russia has really locked itself into a pretty good situation. But one thing I'm surprised that didn't happen is you said Russia will use China against the U.S. Well, I'm surprised in terms of missile development that the U.S. pulled out the INF and just didn't use Japan as a, I'm surprised we didn't get like a proxy arms race, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect these missiles to be stationed in the Philippines and Taiwan.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's if the Koreas are going to be joined, that's where I would expect it. If there's supposed to be companies that are going to be leaving China for the Pacific rim, then I would suspect that to protect American interests in the Asian Pacific, that it is going to place intermediate missiles there. Because China hasn't stopped building the man-made islands. It's still surging. It's still going on its mission, so to speak. So.
Yeah, I don't think they'll go as far as Taiwan. I mean, the U.S. has only ever moved military forces in the Taiwanese water into Taiwan during times where they had a dispute with China, and we've never really kept a permanent presence there. But I don't see us. I don't think even the people in Washington are foolish enough to put missiles on Taiwan. I agree they'll keep them in the Philippines, which is a move I would actually support. They'll probably put some in like some of the Japanese islands that we have a military presence on. And America has several Pacific holdings, such as I know Guam's a bit far off for intermediate missiles, but we have several little island holdings we got from either the Spanish-American War or World War II that we may put these missiles on. But again, in retrospect, maybe this wasn't such a bad move. And if he has to use the Russia issue to get us to take on China, so be it. It's not ideal, but nothing is ever ideal. But speaking of Russia, we have their neighbor Ukraine, which we discussed about last week, and our good friend John Bolton has taken a little trip to the Ukraine. Now, yesterday, John Bolton tweeted, quote, "I had a productive meeting with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Klimkin discussing regional security, Russian interference, and expectations for free and fair elections. Confirmed our mutual agreement to realizing a prosperous Ukraine, whole, free, and at peace."
Well, I mean, he knows what to say. That is the narrative. That is the mythology, right? I doubt very much is going to change in Ukraine. Even if Ukraine had Crimea, it would still be in the same position. I wouldn't. Ukraine would still be looked at as a problematic country, even if NATO had a base, simply because of its Russian population.
Yeah, and
Ukrainians who are sympathetic to Russia.
Yeah, all Ukraine would have more is 24 sailors not in captivity. That's honestly the only thing they would gain.
Yeah.
But last week we discussed the Ukrainian elections and the success of outsider candidate Zelensky. And we predicted that the U.S. would intervene in some way and try to change the outcome of the elections. I'm still expecting a major scandal to come out against Zelensky. Now, Bolton's visit seemed like a sign of, I would almost say, nervousness to me. 5 years after the quote-unquote revolution, and the Ukrainian people aren't interested in what's being force-fed to them.
Yeah, they're not. And I mean, I have a Ukrainian friend who basically tells me about, the state of things there, and they're very cynical. Zelensky is looked at as a moderate who can give, the right nod to the West and to some of the nationalists. But if he wins, it's going to be, I think, a shit show because, well, he's Jewish, and the conflict between supporting like some of the neo-Nazi groups like Azov, who are supported by Israel, but a president of Ukraine who is like openly Jewish, I don't think it's going to go very well. I think it will destabilize the country.
Oh, yeah, especially when that said president of Jewish descent is calling for negotiations with Russia. I doubt Azov is going to be happy with either of those things.
Yeah.
But again, it's very interesting because I've been calling this even before the show started. I called this back actually a few weeks before the show started, about talking about 4 years since the Ukrainian Revolution. Of course, this was last March, saying, yeah, Ukraine is gonna crawl back to Russia. Look, things may heat up. There may be more conflict in the east, but at the end of the day, the Ukrainian people, they're going to realize we don't want the West. The West as it is, their values, their interests are not in line with ours, and we're going to go towards the Russians. So yeah, I feel a bit I like this was kind of, you could see this from a mile away is what I'm saying. But more European news is Hungary, seems like the last sane country in the world at this point, is in yet another spat with the European Union. Now, infamous Eurocrat Guy Verhofstadt, I'm sure you're all familiar with him.
Yeah. The
He
man with the
tweeted,
unfortunate teeth.
yeah, he tweeted on Monday, disgracefully under Viktor Orban, Hungary has moved from a free country to a partly free country. Fact: the rise of far-right populist movements is linked to a reduction in hashtag freedom. It doesn't have to be this way! Exclamation point. Hashtag EP19, hashtag Generation Europe.
It's just so boomer tier. It's just awful. I don't know who he's convincing. He won't convince anybody in Hungary. Um, I mean, he's the same guy who said that the EU cannot move forward by allowing the same amount of autonomy and power of the national states within the EU. He's basically calling for a reduction of. He's calling. He's calling literally for less freedom and accusing them of being illiberal.
Isn't he one of the
So
proponents of the pan-European military force too?
I'm not positive. You could be right, but that would be hilarious. And I mean, I think a European military force, in a way, is a signal that there's only so much America can afford to keep afloat in Europe. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
and
I don't think it's because they're at odds, to be honest. Like I don't think a European army is necessarily uh, a counter to America's NATO.
oh, it plays well to the European liberals who feel uncomfortable about Trump. That's
Yeah.
the rationale they're using to build it. But I think it's probably because they realize, oh yeah, America, Trump or not, is heading towards dire straits, at least in some sense, kind of like what we were talking about with the Syria thing before the show. How America will probably have to start withdrawing assets just because of internal problems alone. But I think it's funny. I'm going to echo the sentiments you just put forward. The same organization trying to champion democracy was the one that staged a coup in Ukraine, forced Ireland to the EU, holding multiple referendums till they finally voted yes, tried to stifle the Italian election, and are the same ones stifling Brexit. And they're going to stand here and lecture us about how Viktor Orban doesn't respect democracy.
Yeah, it's just a neoliberal talking point. I mean, the West in the last 70 years or so has cultivated the weak effete male, a sort of perfect metropolitan type, and this German minister is clearly that type. Um, and all they can do is kind of send out a kind of intellectual scorn. Um, I don't think they feel very in charge right now.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, they wouldn't be this. I don't know how you put it, but you can just tell by the tone of their statements and the way they behave that they're nervous, which I suppose is a good thing. Now, I know this story is very near and dear to you, but Macedonia has joined the big globo homo. They are officially part of NATO, the 30th member, as a matter of fact. Now, North Macedonia, as it is now known, was welcomed into NATO as the 30th member, despite the referendum failing to reach even the minimum turnout. Now, the parliament vote was no surprise dubious. Amnesty was offered to members of parliament who voted in favor of entering NATO for their various crimes, whether it be corruption or supporting whatever. But again, what you'd expect from politicians. Now, the real question is, how much will Macedonia actually contribute to the alliance? They seem like they'd be a net negative, and it's more there just to prick the Serbians in the side.
Right. Macedonia has a huge pollution problem, especially the capital Skopje right now. And from what I'm seeing, the amount of money that they're expected to pay, small as it is, will be a burden on on Macedonia. So, but the rationale is that's what it takes, and prosperity is coming right around the corner, and so on and so forth. I mean, I see Macedonia joining NATO as really Serbia containment. I think that's its purpose, is to wedge discord between Macedonia and Serbia, which generally are, on good relations. Um, in a sort of not as serious as the sort of CIA led uh, discord that's being fomented right now between the new Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. I think what they want to do is set up the possibility of anonymity between these two countries when America can't really even be in there to steer the situation, as it were, in the same way that post British colonialism in India sought the state of Pakistan, later Pakistan and Bangladesh, as a way to contain India. Britain knew it would have to leave, but it needed to sow a certain amount of discord to keep India in check. And I'm very saddened that I think something like that is being played out both in Macedonia and in Ukraine, of course.
Oh, I would agree, but I will say this. You said Skopje has a massive pollution problem. Now, I can't believe you talk about Albanians that way. That is very disrespectful.
Oh my God! Oh, the poor sheep did it.
I had to shoehorn in that joke as the minute you said that. I couldn't
You,
resist. But
you've alienated our Albanian listeners.
oh, all zero of them.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like Macedonia just rolled over not to get the Ukrainian treatment. Now, the referendum received 90% approval with a 36% turnout, which assumes it was probably the metropolitan liberals who voted in favor of this and the ones who showed up to actually vote.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Most people in Macedonia don't want this. They're very disappointed by it. Their political class has made this possible. So that's where we are right now.
Now, to segue into Serbia, I didn't mention this to you, but I did see something about this, and it's funny because they're also ramping up the propaganda against Serbia a lot lately. Not like they've ever been on good terms with the Serbians, but it's funny because they're trying to paint the president Alexander Vucic, I believe is how you pronounce his name, that
Vucic.
he. Yes, I'll leave it to the Slav to pronounce the Slav name. That he apparently is on an anti-journalist crusade in the vein of Erdogan and Putin. They talked about all these numbers since 2012 about all the journalists that have disappeared and been arrested. So again, they're trying to appeal to the Western liberals, saying we have to stop the evil Serbian dictator disappearing the journos.
Right, and you know what? The Serbian journals that have disappeared in Kosovo as well. So it's for the Serbs. This is real time. They don't care. They know that their reporters are targeted. So it's really a moot point for them.
Yeah, and I know you could say it for the West, but especially in these Eastern European countries, journalists are pretty much propagandists that don't really have the love of the population. So most Serbians, your average Serbian probably isn't going to care about this.
I wouldn't say they don't care. I mean, I think it will generally make them unhappy. Absolutely, they will be disappointed, much like they were disappointed when Macedonia recognized Kosovo. Like I say, it's there to create wedges and discord.
Yeah.
Like that's its purpose.
And just one last thing on Serbia. Something I find funny is you've seen a lot of propaganda against Vujic, I believe you said how his name is pronounced. You've seen a lot of the media coming out against him, talking about how bad he is. But the funny thing is, to my understanding, the president of Serbia is more the ceremonial role, and most of the power lies in the prime minister, who is a childless lesbian Croatian. So I doubt she has much investment in the future of Serbia, and seems like she'd be the perfect one just for the neoliberals. Seems like she would get along just fine with your Merkels and Macrons.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they want in these countries is to like dramatically alter the culture, right? I think in 2019 we know now the intimate relationship between capitalism, female power, and gay rights, and so on. And not that this is going to bring back the population into Macedonia. It won't, and the West isn't concerned about that. But what they want to do is create a culture that has some kind of power there. Again, as a stopgap to any kind of nationalism. Like, I mean, take for instance Poland. Poland. I know I've listened to people who've gone to Poland, and yeah, they have blue-haired lesbians walking on the streets of Warsaw and so on, and gay people, like my base Poland, but like it's a long game that they're playing.
Yeah, I mean Poland only looks based because they're next to Germany. Let's all just be honest
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you go a little west. It's like what is this place? I'm gonna go back to the I'll deal with here and there, but Germany, that's a no go. But yeah, I get your point. It is funny. It's almost like you call it dead hand switch. So like when America does finally have to do its final retreat, that oh yeah, look, we've made our influence, we've left our legacy, and have fun with the pride parades.
Right, right. So it's that's what I think it's there for.
Yeah. Now let's get on to some Venezuelan news. Now this is actually going to be one of the relatively shorter segments, which is a surprise after the past couple of weeks here. Now there are claims that the Venezuelan military has blocked the highways in order to block humanitarian aid, quote unquote, given. Now, given my previous comments on Venezuela, I believe the Venezuelan military would do something like this. Again, their planning isn't necessarily the smartest. They used pretty much just semi trailers to block the highway. But I can understand the fear of why their government may want to block these aids, considering the fact these aid packages. Oh, it's like, is this banana? No, no, that's a rifle. Don't put that in your mouth, please. No.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad just to tie this in with America with Trump's address about America will never be a socialist country, and of course there were all the MAGA-pedes and the boomercons and the normies, tweeting this out like, oh my God, he totally wrecked the Democrats. And the truth is, like, America's greatest ally, that like almost every one of these people in these various groups support Israel, but 82% of Israel is public owned, is government owned. Venezuela, by that measure, is not a socialist country. It has far more private property than Israel does. So like it's just really low tier stuff. It's not very well investigated, and it'll fuel the support for now.
Yeah,
We'll see
add
where
that
it
on
goes.
top. You add that on top of his legal immigration comments. Look, we don't want to be like Venezuela, but we're going to let them in so long as they file the paperwork.
I know we're gonna have the biggest, most beautiful immigrants ever.
Yeah. That's one thing I find funny about that. Again, I've made my position on the socialism thing clear. It's not that I'm necessarily socialist, but I think again, an economic ideology can't be good or evil. I just don't think it would work in the United States in particular. But I've rehashed this over the past couple episodes. If you want to listen to that, but let's move on to some more Venezuelan news now. If the U.S. is really so concerned about getting aid to Venezuela, let's do some airdrops, I guess. I'm sure that wouldn't look conspicuous or anything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've thought the Venezuela thing over too. I think you know, let's put oil aside. I think this is still about the INF and intermediate base missiles. And that is that America does not want Russia to have intermediate missiles there. And but that is probably a bigger threat to them than getting hold of Venezuelan oil, because most of the sanctions that America has placed on Venezuela uh, are on individuals and they don't involve oil. Uh, from what I've read, if anybody knows different,
Yeah,
let me know.
it
But
wasn't
it's
until
not
about
about the
two
oil.
weeks ago that we sanctioned the oil. But yeah, so you're right in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, up until now, up until let's say the end of 2018.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we worry about is that if this turns into a long, protracted war, or just sanctions for starvation in order to get the government that you want, that's going to not only because of course it won't just destabilize Venezuela, it'll begin to destabilize other countries around Venezuela. It'll have a domino effect, and America will have to pay for it. And it will have to pay for it by accepting refugees. It'll have to pay other countries to keep refugees there. It's just generally a bad move.
but it won't pay for a wall to keep them out.
That's right. Damn, we spent all the money on Venezuela, no wall.
Yeah, and as far as the oil and resource things go, I think the people in DC, as much as they maybe have their hubris and arrogance and in some cases ignorance, I think they have to know that the Venezuelans would do a scorched earth campaign if the U.S. tried to get involved militarily.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. There's a strong possibility. I mean, in our chat offline, as you were saying, that it's kind of slipping away from the news at the moment. It's not the hot topic it was last week already.
Yeah, it didn't catch on. It didn't cause the outrage that even the first false flag in Syria back in 2013 did. I mean, you look at the second, third false flag in Syria. Yeah, they just again, there's diminishing returns. But this Venezuelan crisis that they tried to drum up, I mean, that they tried to, I should say, capitalize on, it had no returns at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, except for people arguing on Twitter and on YouTube, but I don't really see a lot.
Yeah, aside from like the eternal debates about the intricacies of capitalism and socialism that are already constantly raging on, not much happened.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Venezuela has become like a touchstone for this capitalism versus socialism debate. But
Yeah,
yeah, to me, both those ideologies are dead, anyways. So
yeah. I guess we're third positionist gang on the show now. Yeah, but the EU, of course, is still calling for elections. Not that their voice really has as big as influence as they'd like to think they do, and both sides are paying lip service to it. Like Guaido's like, oh yes, I'll hold elections. Oh yes, I want democracy restored to Venezuela, and Maduro's like, oh yes, I'll hold elections eventually. So again, it's just both sides saying, oh, we'll hold elections just to keep the international powers pleased. But probably the biggest gem to come out of Venezuela this week isn't even from Venezuela. It's from who other than John Bolton, and he tweeted that, quote, the U.S. will consider sanction off-ramps for any Venezuelan senior military officer that stands for democracy and recognizes the constitutional government of President Juan Guaido. If not, the International Finance Circle, I wonder who that will be closed off completely. Make the right choice! Exclamation point. So
yeah, I mean, supporting Maduro at this point is just basically you're just dog whistling anti-Semitism.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Israel did actually have a complaint about about Venezuela being too anti-Semitic.
Say what you will about the state of Israel, say what you will about all of that, but at least up until recently, fantastic PR, fantastic propaganda machine. They know how to manipulate public opinion. Like I said, that's changed within the past 2 years. But for that good, 1948 to 2014, they were on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
So credit where credit is due. But again, John Bolton, it's like went from the U.S. is considering all options on the table. Maduro must step down to like, hey, any military officer want to take power? We'll give you some money. Yeah. Hey, get rid of the Maduro guy. You'll have a nice payday.
I know they're literally saying we're going to bribe the right people in, and like, see, democracy won.
Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't even care as much. I would still be opposed to it on principle, on the grounds of, yeah, this isn't going to end well for us, and our interventions rarely end well. But I wouldn't care as much if they just dropped this Democracy Act and said, oh, yeah, we think Venezuela is a threat. We think Venezuela is a threat because of Russian and Chinese presence. If they came out and said that, that would convince enough American people to go along with it. Again, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily agree with getting involved in Venezuela for reasons I've went on extensively about, but it would just drop the democracy thing, which not even, I think, a lot of liberals care about anymore.
Yeah, I do. I think, as I said earlier, I think capitalism, socialism, democracy. I think they're all basically dead or dying ideologies. Nobody really believes them in a universalist sense anymore. They believe them in a contained sense, like with a definitive area, or rather people who aren't the kind of people that they don't want to participate in ideology in democracies have to be, I don't know, exterminated or removed or whatever.
Re-educated.
Yeah, or re-educated, right? Yeah, I would say that one of the reasons probably they can't talk too much about China and Russia being there, which you would think with the Russia, with the with the Russia investigation, you would think that would lend them, clout and act as a persuasive tool, but they don't. And I think the reason maybe they don't is because it would set off a kind of panic. And I don't think they want a panic.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis, but people could live stream the degeneracy they got up to.
I never thought of it, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I think that's what they're trying to avoid. Now, uh, again, Venezuela. I'm glad it's kind of fallen off the radar, but I've pretty much laid this out that either way, whether Maduro somehow manages to stay in power, or whether the moderate opposition, quote unquote, takes power and takes those IMF loans, it's not going to end well. Refugees are going to flood to Colombia, Brazil, United States. We'll either have to, pay Colombia and Brazil to keep them at bay and pay for their expenses there, or we'll have to pay for their expenses here. In either way, again, the United States, I mean, I'd hate to go back to blame the previous president like I did last week, but Obama, that ship sailed. He could have cut a backdoor deal with Maduro, and a lot of this could have been avoided. But what has happened, and I just hope we build the wall in time and have enough sense to keep them out. But I doubt that's going to happen, but it could. You got to hold on to a little bit of hope that's there.
Yeah, yeah. A little bit of hope doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it could be that straw that breaks the camel's back at the very least. But let's move on to some more light topics, some more good news, which is the second Korean summit has been confirmed. It is happening. Now, as we said at the top of the show, the second Korea summit has been confirmed, and it will be on February 28th in Vietnam. Now, despite Trump's recent follies, the one thing he's stuck to and has been consistently successful on is the Korea issue.
Yeah, I honestly think that the rejoining, or the bringing, helping to facilitate the rejoining of the Koreas is of course is part of the Pacific pivot. He is trying to bring North Korea into the West vis-a-vis South Korea, and I think there's a bet that by doing so, that this is also part of China containment, but that it will have a gradual effect on China as well, as far as American presence is concerned.
Yeah, and I think morale-wise, just having North Korea, even like if it's like a more Korean independence, Korea staying for themselves thing, I think just North Korea not being solidly under the influence of China is going to be a pretty big morale blow.
Yeah, exactly. That's its basic function.
Yeah, but on Tuesday, no surprise, UN monitors claimed that North Korea was moving to protect its nuclear, missile, and weapons stockpiles before the summit, and in fear of any inspections. Now, the U.S. has also reached an agreement with South Korea to increase aid for its troops stationed in Korea, where the Korean government agreed to give us another $1 billion a year to sort of offset the cost of our presence there. Not that that $1 billion to cover up for it, but I mean at least something. But I will say this about the missile and nuclear sites. This happened before the last summit where there was some talk about it. Of course, Kim Jong-un insults Mike Pence, says, I don't want the Gaddafi treatment. Trump pulls out, then it all comes together. So there may be some, I guess you call it testing the waters on both sides for the summit. But again, the media, especially the website got this from The Hill, will want to drum this up, make Trump seem like, oh, look, he's a bumbling idiot, and North Korea is playing him. They're hiding their nuclear missile stockpiles.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I don't know what more I could add to that.
Yeah, and on top of the U.S. troop aid increasing, it turns out we are still not going to do the annual military drills that we called off, I believe, in October. So, progress is being made on the Korean Peninsula. Say what you will about Trump. He may do follies domestically, he may do follies in foreign policy, but the few things he's done, he's let a lot of pressure out of the valve, especially when it comes to alignment of Asia, as you were saying. The Korean, at least Korean cooperation, even if not unification, does a giant blow to China in both morale and their position and otherwise. And again, we could get in some of the domestic things he's let pressure on the valve in, but specifically on the Korea issue, I think he's really changed the alignment of Asia for the next few decades at least.
Yeah, I would say so. It just doesn't have any play in America. I mean, the left and the right don't appreciate it on this. So
yeah, I mean, unless like you're a diehard Trump supporter, like one of his like follow him through hell or high water, sort of the ones you find on R the Donald, or more on our side who pay attention to like the long game, what's happening in the world, what will happen decades onward, you're probably not going to care about this.
Yeah.
Now, in more good news, Afghanistan negotiations have continued consistently to the point where there hasn't been any withdrawals from the table from the Taliban or the U.S. negotiators. As I said, these negotiations have been taking place in Qatar on and off since, I believe, July. It's not, and when I say on and off, nobody's ever called off the negotiation, but they haven't been like on a consistent schedule. It's just been things are heating up in Afghanistan. Let's talk about things now. Trump did go on about this in State of the Union, how, look, we can't be in Afghanistan forever. And, of course, Rand Paul, who I think has actually steered Trump out of a lot of trouble, I would say, especially over the past half year or so, pretty much ever since the Russia summit. Rand Paul was actually pretty instrumental in the organization of that. I would say that Afghanistan, it may be one of the few hellholes we might actually get out of as compared to whatever is going on with our Syria withdrawal, whether it's happening or not, what contingency we're leaving there, why we're still going to stay there, and all the other complex, complete tug of war involved in Syria withdrawal. Afghanistan may be more cut and dry because it's actually more in the American consciousness at this point. To the point where most of your voting population remembers 9/11, remembers going into Afghanistan, and the fact that we've been there for, almost 19 years, even though if you check the fact checkers, they'll tell you it was 18 years. We got to be very specific about this.
Yeah, I would say Rand Paul is probably who Trump should be listening to more than Ivanka. Yeah, I would say Afghanistan is even more important for the U.S. to leave than Syria at the moment. What would happen if America did leave? Again, like with me, I'll believe it when I see it, and that applies for both, Afghanistan, Syria, whatever amount of troops are still in Iraq. All that is a kind of a decrease. I mean, I would hope that they completely leave, but even if the numbers are cut in half, that would be great. But I think we talk about a morale hit with the Koreas in reference to China. Some Americans, I think, if they saw America leaving Afghanistan and Syria, their morale would be crushed.
Oh yeah, these people who have championed this, the neocons and the liberal interventionists, they'd be like, it's our pet project. We've been there for almost 2 decades. We've made so much progress in the point of very superficial things that they've done. We can't leave them to the, Stone Age the Taliban would take them to.
Right, as if they're not there anyways. Even with 18 years of American presence. I mean, guys like Max Boot think we should be there 300 years.
Oh yeah, it took 300 years for the British to subjugate India, so we got to stay in Afghanistan for the next 300 years.
Right, and that worked out great.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, British, they're at the top of their game. They're still a world superpower. They still have complete control over the Indian subcontinent. You ask anyone, trust me, it worked out fabulously for them to the point where they dominated India so much they can go into London and get curry anywhere.
Yeah, who won?
Yeah,
There's
who
literally more
won?
Indians living in Britain than there were ever British living in India for 300 years. Like it's just astounding.
Yeah, aren't you glad that a lot of proponents of the British Empire would say this one? Oh, we civilized them. Well, at what cost?
Right. I mean, I think the basic thing was about trade and about making just,
Yeah.
hand over fist money. I suppose it worked for a while.
You see, the Portuguese were smart. They just got a couple islands outside of it, took the spice, and went home.
Who's playing the long game now?
Yeah, yeah. Portugal will dominate the world seas once again. I hold to that.
The ultimate Atlanticist power.
Oh, of course. This is one thing we've overlooked in the show, Portugal. But in all seriousness, yeah, this would be a major morale boost to your Max Boots of the world. And again, the less you, my theory about Afghanistan originally, in retrospect, is yeah, there were some resources there that we need, but it seemed like the perfect staging ground to ferment crisis for a possible future conflict in Iran. So, again, aside from Trump's occasional comments and Bolton's occasional comments, and of course Mike Pompeo's occasional comments, the fervor around Iran is bad has died down a lot in the last few months, but I think especially early on, like the Bush, the PNAC, like when they had full control of the White House and the administration, they viewed Afghanistan as a stepping stone to Iran.
Right, right. And it's a way to also, burden Russia as a kind of wedge between Russia and Iran, too.
Yeah. But again, I don't see any. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think there's going to be at least a significant amount of U.S. withdrawal, maybe not full withdrawal, but again, if we can get any number out and back home, that both to keep our boys home and to ease tensions across the globe, I'll take what I can get at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Now, we have to discuss Trump's comments about the Syria withdrawal and how he wants to leave a small force behind to protect Israel. So, with the withdrawal, Trump has now come out and said he wants a small contingency of troops to counter any threats to Israel in Syria. Now, while I'm not happy with this, in fact, I'm kind of pissed off about it. I don't put too much stock in it because we could be hearing the exact opposite thing tomorrow or next week. Again, it goes back to the schizophrenic policy. Now, some may call this 4D chess. I will not go that far. Others may say it's a slip, which I'm more inclined to believe. But his words about protecting Israel are very telling. Similar to actually Mike Pence's speech at APAC last year about how he said, quote, the winds are changing, old enemies are now friends, in reference to the Arab Gulf states now working with Israel against Iran. Something that, again, has been a secret for many years, more of an open secret than anything, but he comes out and admits it. And it could be a foot in your mouth kind of moment. And Trump saying outright that, oh, yeah, we're there for Israel's benefit. It's very telling. Maybe Trump didn't intend for that, but I think it speaks to the right people and confirms a lot of things that have been said over the years.
Right. I mean, people have speculated. Kevin Michael Grace brought up an interesting idea that Trump is just A/B testing. He's testing for the responses. You notice he did this sort of with Pelosi during his address. I'm not 100% convinced. The Trump in December and January who said, "Yeah, we're pulling out. Israel will be fine. They got lots of money." Like, I want that Trump back so bad. Uh, like, I'm not. I think this address for me is telling that pressure is being exerted on him, and maybe he's caving.
Yeah. And I will say this, again, I want that Trump back too, but come, March, we may get it back. Again, it's one of those things where my support of Trump is passive for that reason because he's so inconsistent, whether that's by his own doing or whether that's by just the circumstances surrounding him, which I say it's probably more the latter than the former. But yeah, again, it probably is A/B testing, but considering the fact Trump gave the victory speeches back in December and talked about, and the fact that official orders was signed, even that was like one of Mattis's last acts, signing some withdrawal order, something of significance has to be done. Like I said, I doubt it'll be a full withdrawal. We'll probably keep enough there just to cause enough trouble and not get us into too much trouble. But some significant action will have to be done, considering the fact that the bureaucratic process already started. Now, of course, there'll be stifling on the way, but again, like I said, if it's just that little bit of release of pressure, I say it's all worth it in the end.
Right, right. My only fear is that the American presence will be there for a very long time. I mean, who knows? There could be a miracle. Something really bad happens to the Americans there, and they leave. Just like in Reagan's time, they finally left Lebanon.
Yeah, or it could be like a, not to sound too ridiculous, but I know that these comparisons get made a lot. Could be a Roman Empire type of situation where things get so bad at home that we can't sustain, that we had to choose a finger to cut off to save the hand, and that finger might be Syria.
I think that's a good assessment. Yeah. In a way, he has to. His ties to Israel, his ties to Jewish power in America is so strong and developed so over many years that he has to give them a bone. But is America in the next 2-3 years going to fight another war for Israel? It's not looking that way.
Yeah, as much as I'm sure plenty of people, all the right people want us to, I think we've discussed several times before, I think they've exhausted all their capital to be able to at least pull off a full-scale war. Now, though, as we'll get into the show later, the new jihadists for hire program may play into their interest, not as much as they like to, but they may get something out of it. But again, I think they've exhausted so much with the disaster that Iraq and Afghanistan were to the American people, to the point where they're still seared in our minds, and we're talking about them right now on this show. And to the point where people are like, why are we in Syria? Oh, the third chemical attack, the third year in a row. This doesn't seem suspicious at all. I think they exhaust a lot of the capital playing the American people for a lot stupider than we actually are. I'm not saying that the American people are just this, entire nation of geniuses. There's a lot of weak links, I'll put it. But they've exhausted a lot of what they could have done. And again, we discussed this actually back in September, that instead of Iraq and Afghanistan, they should have blamed it on Iran and took out the Iranians first if they really wanted to get their goal done.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And 2019 may be the first year where a fake chemical attack is blamed in Iran, or there's just no chemical attack at all.
I'm actually leaning towards there's going to be nothing at all. Now, I'm sure they'll pull something. They may actually. They'll probably blame it on ISIS this time because, again...
no, you're right!
Yeah, they'll say, we have to stay there. ISIS still exists even after all this time. But, again, I think the warmongering after Assad, it will continue, but I don't think it's going to be as strong as it was. And I think, again, if they pull another chemical attack, I think then you'll actually get some of the mainstream conservatives, even some of the liberals who absolutely despise Trump, saying, okay, look, fourth year in a row, what's going on? I'm having a hard time believing this.
Right, and let's not forget that in late 2018, a few CIA operatives were taken out in Syria, apparently by ISIS, and there was no uptick. And Trump didn't move on his position about leaving Syria. So, I don't think I think the political cachet has been exhausted.
Yeah, I think the new justification that who knows how long they'll be able to squeeze anything out of it. Well, we have to counter what's left of ISIS, or else they'll spontaneously appear again. I think that's the strategy they're going to take going forward in 2019.
I'm betting on a Maduro-ISIS link.
No, I mean, they already tried the time to Hezbollah, because we all know Hezbollah has so many interests outside of Lebanon.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but they probably will say ISIS is in Venezuela, but that's actually a good segue, because Lebanon has actually finally formed a government, and it's been almost a year since the election, but Lebanon has finally formed a government where Hezbollah, they're not a majority, but they pretty much are the plurality within the government, and Israel, of course, is not happy. Israel and Hezbollah have been having a bit of a soft war going on lately with the tunnels Hezbollah has been digging into Israel, and Israel, like with their anti-tunnel sweeping teams, the IDF was going off about how impressive it was. Like, again, if they can do that successfully, it can't be that hard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would agree with you. It's really becoming comical right now.
Yeah, we're watching two pretty incompetent forces going head to head, and it's like maybe the least incompetent ones. I'm not going to pretend like Hezbollah is great, and except for what it was. It's just another Middle Eastern militia I could not care less about. I've said it before, I'll say it again. But I'm not like going to paint them as some great guerrilla fighters. They aren't the most competent. It's just that the enemies they fight are Israel and ISIS and other Sunni militias. So the
I'll give them a little more
competition they're up
credit.
against.
Personally, I'll give them a little more credit. I think they did really well against Israel. I think, like, considering like what little they have, I think they stretched it out pretty well. I mean, they're not like, they're not any force that America has to worry about, obviously, right? They're a local militia that's there to counter, Israeli and Sunni and American interests. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
They
I just can't think of another militia that could have countered Israel in 2006 the way they did. I can't think of one.
they have their victories, but I agree that 2006 was completely embarrassing for Israel. But I'm also as the great guerrilla fighters as some people may want you to think they are.
Right. I mean, I'm not an expert on Hezbollah myself. I don't know. I don't. Other than what I
Neither am
said, I
I.
don't
But
know what else to say.
I I really don't care about them, and the reason I'm even talking about them is because Pompeo wants me to believe they're operating in Venezuela, which I have a bit of a hard time
I
believing.
know. I mean, to return to the point, I mean, that's just it's so ludicrous. It's so. I mean, it's kind of like ludicrous the way Macron accuses Putin of meddling in the French elections, that he's funding the Yellow Jackets. Oh my God. How he took advantage of all. It's on that order. It's on that order. Hello?
Um, the only thing I can say, hello, am I there?
Yep, I can hear you. Hello?
Oh, okay, but the only thing I can say is expect a lot of Israeli. I'll be right back.
Okay. So Constantine might be just having a little bit of problems. He'll be back shortly. We were expecting this. His region is
Testing,
having some
testing.
some weather. I can hear you.
Wow, that's actually the best stretch we've had without me having to
Uh,
drop out and come back.
Absolutely, definitely.
But yeah, just expect a lot of Israeli whining about Hezbollah. That doesn't really amount to anything. They'll probably do some strikes on Hezbollah positions in Syria and Lebanon, which it's not like they have been doing those already. But just expect Netanyahu, especially with the upcoming election, to complain a lot about Hezbollah, and that's what you have to look forward to.
Yeah, we have to build the wall because we don't want Hezbollah to go from Venezuela to Mexico and then into the state. Oh no, 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 not that.
Yeah, wait, did you just convince the neocons to build the wall?
I have there's a meme potential there, I think.
Yeah. That does have some meme potential, but let's get into. This is probably one of the I dare I say funny stories of the night. And sold to Saudi Arabia somehow fell in the hands of Sunni militant groups in Yemen.
Oh.
How could this have ever happened? So the U.S. is investigating whether or not U.S. weapons we sold to Saudi Arabia ended up in the hands of jihadist groups in Yemen. Now, this should come as a shock to nobody. Now, Democratic lawmakers are quick to try to pin this on Donald Trump, which I by no means support Trump's arms deals to the Saudis, as I've made abundantly clear. But despite this event in question that they're investigating happened in 2015. Now, after the outrage about Khashoggi dying down, I have no problem calling out Saudi Arabia for these kind of shenanigans, but I question the motives of them calling them out. And I think that the fact that this story came up is because nobody cares about Jamal Khashoggi anymore.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think in the same way that I mean, pragmatically, the American public is tired of the wars, but in a sense, they accept the lies for the wars as well on the surface. They're not wedded to these ideas. I think there's a profound war fatigue for, I would say, at least 50% of the population, and so if you poll people and say, do you believe that America sells weapons that they know Saudi Arabia will sell to various jihadist groups in Yemen and Syria? They'll say, yeah, obviously. I think you're going to see at least one in every three, maybe even higher, of people, just out, especially after 2016. So it's just a kind of the only thing I think the thing that we have going for us is that there is a kind of a war fatigue. So if they publish stories like this, maybe the good sign is they're ready to defund or ready to leave or wash their hands of it, or maybe they're even ready for a quote unquote defeat.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've said several times previously that we need to confront Saudi Arabia. But again, a lot of the ways a lot of people, even I agree with, want to go about it is they want to just be very belligerent and like call out Saudi Arabia at every chance we get. And they completely ignore the entire OPEC politics. And again, the way energy is changing, with the way American oil production is, and European oil, like Russians and Venezuela, as a matter of fact, that's an entire other thing. OPEC is losing relevance, especially the Saudi-led faction of it. And again, we give it a few years, we could probably drive them out of their influence over global oil prices. So I wouldn't be too concerned about Saudi Arabia going into the future. They've already had budgetary problems, but again, I understand wanting to confront them, but I don't think now is the right time, nor do we have the right idea on how to go about it.
Yeah, we're stretched out.
Yeah, give it a few years. Give U.S. oil boom few more years to go on. Hopefully, it does. But again, Saudi Arabia, it's pardon the expression, a ticking time bomb.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
And with that, let's close out the show with probably an even funnier story. So, former National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice has teamed up with Ivanka Trump and started a movement called the WGDP, Women's Global Development Project. Now, keep in mind, in the underdeveloped world, especially in the Middle East, the employment rate is extremely high, especially amongst men. And they want to push this program in Africa and the Middle East for getting the majority of the jihadists from. Now, due to the high unemployment, these countries' governments, especially the ones with oil, maintain generous welfare states to pacify the population. As oil prices remain low, as we were discussing, these welfare states have been strained and haven't been as generous as they are lately. So, combined with strained welfare states and push for more women in the workforce, many men will likely join militant groups simply because they have no other opportunities or the militant groups are offering to pay well. Now, some say this move is due to neoliberal hubris, but I say it's a bit more malicious. There's nothing more the snakes in Washington, D.C. would love more than an endless pool of jihadists for hire.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right on the money. I mean, if you could say that incels have played important roles in world conquest and world history since time immemorial. Men without partners, men without work, men asked to go fight abroad. I mean, every civilization has had periods where this has been the case.
Yeah,
I
because
think that's very astute of you. What's that?
yeah, if you're a young Saudi man in his 20s or from any of these like Gulf states, you have no employment opportunity because women are taking the workforce. The welfare is dried up. Your government doesn't care about you. And some CIA agent comes up to you and say, "Look, we'll give you some money if you go through this training program and go kill some Iranian targets and go, or maybe go to Syria or Yemen. Look, we'll make sure you're well taken care of for the next few years." Most of them are going to say, "Look, what else am I going to do with my life? I might as well join up."
Well, I mean, that's been the case in the Middle East now for some time.
Yeah, but I think they're really pushing it now. And again,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
they've
They're going
they've
to intensify it.
yeah, they've had quite the pool, but again, they may dare I say triple the size. Again, I call it endless jihadists for hire, and to the point where yeah, we may be shifting our intervention from a large U.S. invasion you would have had in the early 2000s with Iraq and Afghanistan to what we had under Obama and now Trump with the look, we'll keep a small contingency there, just destabilize the country. To the point where it's like, oh look, we have more unemployed single men than ever. Let's just throw some cash at them and let happen what will.
Right. And female solipsism in the West will never see the link. They will never completely understand the link to war because, of course, if you're going to create jobs and opportunities for women, that's great. And if it doesn't, if those privileges aren't given to men either, well, that's even better. The West, its relationship between capitalism and female power is really quite something. In a way, worshiping female power is a way of emboldening and justifying and legitimizing capitalism as well. But female solipsism will ignore it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm curious. Of course, they'll go to Iran. They'll make trouble there. They'll go to Syria, keep the trouble going there, and go to Yemen. Just kicking it, man while he's down. But I'm curious how many of these guys that from the new jihadist for hire program, as I like to call it, will end up in the Philippines or Indonesia, or other like Islamic populations, and more Southeast Asia to and probably what will be our botched plan to counter the Chinese. Because look, I'm all for countering the Chinese, but I have no faith in Washington. And this just seems like something John Bolton would say. Look, let's take some of these guys from Saudi Arabia that are employed, put them in the Philippines. Have them duke it out there. Make some trouble there, so we can come and stabilize it. I can see the neocons making this kind of plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean in the long run, this is a terrible strategy.
Oh yeah, but
It'll just create more instability.
I will say this. This is probably the most Western, at least modern Western thing to happen. You have Condoleezza Rice, one of the architects of the Iraq War, coming and saying, "Oh, I'm going to empower women," but is doing it for like nefarious means, which is what I just laid out. And then you have Ivanka Trump, kind of the dare I say dullard. I don't think the intelligence is too high over there.
I don't think so. I don't think
yeah,
so
and
either.
he's like, "Oh, hey Ivanka, do you want to help me empower women?" And she's like, "Oh, of course." And then Condoleezza Rice, with her scheming and her fabrication of war, conflict, and death, is like, how can I use women's empowerment to create more war? Oh, we'll just create this program here. So it's almost ingenious that I admire it in a twisted way.
Yeah. It is quite diabolical. I remember even before 9/11 or just after, uh, there were feminist groups arguing, granted, not very many, arguing for helping women in Afghanistan. And honestly, I think, like, especially, you have to understand, especially for countries like Afghanistan or Yemen or what have you, um, privileging women above men in a very rapid way in terms of employment uh, will absolutely flatten that society. It's like it's sort of it's weaponized feminism and weaponized capitalism.
Oh no! It is the apex of modern Western civilization, starting out, say, after World War One. This is our MO. This is what it was all building up to, leading up to.
You're right on. In fact, I really like how you put that.
But yeah. So thank you, Condi. Thank you, Condi Rice, for creating a whole new generation of jihadists. And it's funny. Again, you can see this several times throughout history that look, you just create a giant pool of mercenaries, and like I said, I have to admire this because of how diabolical it is. It's like that's terrible, but it's ingenious. How did nobody think of this sooner? And it's actually funny you mentioned about the feminist groups arguing going into Afghanistan. you remember Obama, he campaigned like, oh, we're going to, come back from these wars that don't help us. We're going to, all of Obama's empty promises. One of the things he said when he first got into office, 2009, 2010, talking about how we have to promote women's rights in Afghanistan. Of course, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton right there with them. But I think that, again, we should have seen this coming from a long shot.
Yeah, you're right. In some ways, it's right under our noses, and it's so part and parcel of living in our society that we don't even think of it because it's so ubiquitous.
Well, that episode was just all over the place, and I usually have a certain feeling at the end of episodes, whether I'm like white pill or black pill, or thinking about a certain event, whether I'm concerned about or excited about it. But at the end of this episode, just so chaotic, I think it's killed all emotions within me, and I don't think I'm concerned
I'm
or excited
grateful.
about anything. Yeah, I'm a little bit sad about what's happening in Eastern Europe, but other than that, I usually come away with some passion emotions. Tonight, it's just like I'm awestruck by this last story.
I know. Yeah, I am too. I'll say that I'm kind of emotionally drained after this week, to be honest. I hope next week has some more positive stories.
Or even just like more like stories just that are so. Again, anything out of U.S. meddling Eastern Europe is guaranteed to be funny. So hopefully we'll get some stories out of that next
Oh
week.
yeah, Ukraine elections coming up.
Oh yeah, again, if you want humor for the show, just wait for us to talk about Eastern Europe. But with that, I will leave you guys. We will see you next week, and goodbye.